speak of weaknesses wasn't necessarily a hindrance to us, but it's more how we can work together with our strengths that can really pull us forward to where we want to go. And I think it would be good, well, I haven't had an opportunity to speak with them about it, but I'm looking forward to setting aside some time to chat with them about what I've learned over the last 4 or 5 sessions, and especially in regards to the full circle leadership and allowing them to have a look at it as well and find out their spot and where they're like, because I can pinpoint where I believe they are in the leadership spectrum, and to be able to see where they are as well, and then we can move forward in operating in those strengths together, because I think there are a lot of areas that need more attention, and with myself knowing where my strengths lie, I can pivot, I can pinpoint, okay, well, this is what I can bring to the team, but unless you know where your strengths lie as well, we can't work together cohesively. And I think it's been pretty evident over the last, since we've joined together as a team, that there are some structures that we need to put in place, but it can only be put in place once we know where we all lie, I suppose, where our strengths are, and putting an explanation behind it, a logical explanation behind it. Alana put it so beautifully. I think it would be really great to share and achieve some great outcomes and goals.
Thanks, Denver. Denver, can I just check with everybody else? Did Denver's sound go kind of? Yeah, it did. Okay. So Denver, what we could hear you, or I could hear you, but there's kind of, it's like the sound's on a bit of a, I don't know, a loop. It kind of goes quite quiet for a while and then goes up.
Maybe I'll try and disconnect from my Bluetooth and see if that works better.
Right. Okay. Okay, champion. Thank you, Renee.
Hi everyone. I've really loved the amount of thought-provoking content. I guess there's not a session that goes by where I'm not stimulated in some way. It's really nice to see, concepts like self-managing teams and hear how that's being implemented, like just the gap between theory and practice. That's been really cool. It's also been one of the most significant parts of me has been reflection upon self, and also reflection in space and where my organisation's at. And it's kind of like I wouldn't want to change everything overnight, but it's really got to bring it down to what. How can I take some of this exposure that I've had and put some rubber on the road? And I think that's going to be by starting to get other champions within the organisation, because even I think one of the main things for me is we don't our training structure is very archaic and not contemporary, and not supportive to enabling people to staff on the ground to be really encouraged to make their own decisions. We kind of just train people to follow a plan, but then there's that hierarchical aspect comes in. So now I've got a whole training department that functions in a very different culture in a very different way. So I just think I'm going to start to do some sessions with other leaders in the organisation to see who are my champions, like who has the potential to sort of get it and get that transformational stuff, and tap into those people and just make them work for the same sort of change. We'll try to get them on board, because there's just it's fantastic to hear how progressive everyone's being, but there's just so much work to do. Another 10 years we'll still be doing it.
Thanks, Renee. Nick?
I think similar to Renee in some ways, in that there's I just feel like there's been so much stimulation of possibility for me, and I've taken lots from each session, so it's not like I have a standout guest that we've had. I think what's really helpful for me is that in our context, there's so much within our culture that's really calling for this to come forward, and that really encourages and supports this, but it's a lot of the structure, the language, the intention, the tools that we don't have, that have been lacking, and so it's a little bit of that seems to be most helpful. It's when we can start to put language around some of the things that we've been sensing, and to feel affirmed in that there are other organisations that have been, thinking, feeling, sensing very similar things, and have explored that to real depth, and have created some really structured, intentional ways of being able to work with that. So that's what I'm finding most helpful so far. For my experience with Alana's session on full circle leadership, personally, I found that really helpful in just really extending my awareness of my own leadership privilege, and being able to have a greater awareness around the power that I have, how that is socially valued, creates a lot of opportunities for me, but can often unintentionally undermine others. So that the notion around diversity and leadership, and again, having that really intentional framework for being able to explore that with a group of people, is really helpful.
Fabulous, thanks, Nick. Susan?
Wow. Again, much like Nick, there's not been one real standout for me. Every time, I've had the privilege of hearing the stories of the people that we have as guests on many, many times, and it's always amazing for me, not only how I think that in the practice of telling their story, it's like they're deepening their understanding of what's important, if that makes any sense. And that the quality of the interaction and the questions and the thoughtful dialogue from this group, I think really then just further brings out the possibility, as you've said, in moving from theory to practice. And Kate, like as we said in our call earlier, it's interesting to hear that the impact that full circle leadership had, because I feel like in further courses, or maybe even in the next iteration of this course, having more practical kind of hands-on tools could be interesting. And I'm excited about, even though I'm going to miss the next session with Pim from Corporate Rebels, I think that that's when we start to get into the real practical things that we can do, not only, as Renee said, to support ourselves as ourselves in our personal journeys and mindset challenges and shifts that we need to make to really do this work. But to do it in a way that feels like there's a little bit of scaffolding and practice to it. So yeah, that's what I'm noticing most. What about you, Kate?
I think the thing I'm a bit stuck on at the minute is around, so it takes me to Brian's session around organisations being deliberately developmental. So I think I've shared a bit about, so I work with an organisation called Avivo, and who are on a journey around self-management, creating self-managed teams and trying to reduce the hierarchy. But one of the things that is a challenge or a puzzle, I think a bit like what Simon was saying, it's a bit more complicated than actually just get into teams and let's hope for the best. But one of the things that's a real challenge, and I really don't have an answer to, an understanding of, is colleagues will say to me, so by removing the hierarchy, you've taken away my development ladder. So somebody was talking to me last week about being quite ambitious, and they had a view that they were going to go to become a manager and then whatever. And although I know although I believe it's not necessary to have that people can develop without those kind of structures. And we had a conversation about kind of development in yourself across the organisation. There's other parts of the business that to kind of learn about, grow into. It just didn't really stack up, to be honest. It was a bit, because I think she was also talking about in society in general, like what you were saying, Nick, that managers or the hierarchy is really valued, and your kind of social status is I don't know what I'm saying, but I'm struggling with that a bit really. That what does that look like? And it feels like I'm digging really deep to try and find a way to make sense of that. So yeah, that's what was coming up for me. Wendy, I'm assuming you don't want to check in, because if you're driving, I'm assuming you don't want to.
Oh, can you hear me, Kate?
We can, yeah.
Yeah. So no, I'm all right for now, but it's
Okay.
just be later on. But I've got it all set up on driving, which means you don't see the video, but I'm listening.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm really happy to check in. I think very similar to Simon, I'm really challenged by you know, the work that we were hearing from Morning Star. Yeah, I'm really wondering about, particularly for people who have, you know, it's so deeply embedded in our society that they're not in positions of power, you know, the pay difference between men and women, for example, and then moving into that space of people kind of then having to negotiate all of that really makes me wonder about, well, what's the work and our responsibility to help create an environment where that can happen. Yeah, so I found that really challenging, you know, just to, I don't think we can just expect. So I think it's coming back to all of those sorts of things that people have already been saying, that it takes a lot of work and very considered and intentional work to get to that point, I guess, is yeah, my short summary. Yeah.
Thanks, Wendy. So just, Wendy, because you can't necessarily see us all, that's us all checked in, so there were quite a small group this morning. So I'm just going to move us to, 2 seconds, I'm just going to share my screen. So can everybody see the screen? Yeah, good. Okay, so just as a kind of recap in terms of where we are. So we've still got a couple of months of the programme. Certainly some of our reflection has been, you'll see here that this session, because my dad was sick in the very first session, we cancelled and moved things around a bit. This session was planned to be an open reflection, so it's kind of webinar, open reflection, webinar, open reflection. But it feels like in this programme, with doing that kind of change, we've had a lot of speakers and not a lot of time as a group, I think, to kind of think and reflect together, which is good learning for us because, well, certainly for me, I think people value the speakers more than the open reflection, but I think I might be wrong about that. So certainly people have kind of contacted me outside of the programme to say we need some time to think together. So yeah, so that's where we're at. So like Susan said, we've got Pim at the next session, who is part of the Corporate Rebels, which if you don't know about them, I'll post some information to Slack. They're a great organisation looking at contemporary organisations around the world. And then we'll have another open reflection session. Then we have Helen Sanderson, who's got an organisation called Wellbeing Teams in the UK, which is a kind of self-managed or self-managed teams. And then we'll have the final reflection session. So we're kind of halfway through, but you've still got a couple of months to try or practice something in your organisation if you haven't already. So I just wanted to point that out, just because we are in it, but I still think there's still time to use this group as a way of kind of trying and testing some things in your organisations and getting the support from the rest of the group around that. So Susan, do you want to take us into the recap around the themes?
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to share the slide. The Corporate Rebels, I don't know how much we've talked about them. I can't really remember and how much you know about them, but Pim Demore and Joost were school friends and went off. They lived in I love their story. They grew up on a small island in Holland and each went off to university and got proper jobs. So Joost got a job working for a tech company, and Pim got a job working for an electronics firm or something like that. And they found that they were not really deriving joy from their first career choice, and decided to take a year out and go traveling. But rather than just go traveling, they decided to make what they call a bucket list of people and organizations that inspire them to kind of create a purpose around their travels. And they'd both been super inspired by Frederick Laloux and the idea of less hierarchy and command authority in organizations. And so they went around the world, and they've got a great website where they have a list of about, I don't know, maybe 50. And I think they've probably met and interviewed 3/4 of them by 3/4 of the people in organizations by now around what it took or what it looks like in each of these progressive organizations to orient around work differently. And it's so interesting because we talk about how difficult it is, how hard it is. And yes, each of the people that they've talked to would probably almost to a person reflect that. But the thing that's so interesting to me is that each manifestation, incarnation, form of self-organizing, self-management, decentralized power, no hierarchy, looks different for each organization. However, they have identified that there are some trends that are consistent across organizations that are choosing to work differently. And they are, I think, for me, feels like an extension, almost a practical extension of what Fred Laloux talks about in Reinventing Organizations around self-management, bringing your whole self to work, and this concept of evolutionary purpose to these trends, which, like I said before, seem to be more practical. And so the first is organizations that are moving away from pure profit motivation to being motivated by purpose and a purpose and or values. So organizations like Patagonia, for example, the outdoor clothing manufacturer, exist for a reason beyond pure profit. And there are many organizations that are great examples of this. The second is the hierarchical pyramid to networks of teams. This is a lot about what I think that our theory of change for this particular course is, that as we are trying to be more nimble, more agile, more responsive, smaller units of teams that are closer to the customer, closer to the decision, allow us to be more responsive, develop together better, and provide better service and be more competitive. The third is this idea of directive leadership moving to supportive leadership. Many of you might have heard of this term called servant leadership. I'm not quite sure about that phrase anymore, but I really do like the idea of supportive leadership. So moving from management style where you followed the rules, you've got to the top of the pyramid, and now you tell people what to do, right? There's a clear move away from that, and a clear move to leadership styles which are more nurturing, but not nurturing in a negative way or in a parenting way, but really creating the conditions for everybody to be leaders in their own right and to develop to their full potential. The fourth is this move away from planning and predicting to experimenting and adapting. 10 years ago, it was not uncommon for an organization to have a 2, 5, 10-year plan and working towards that. I think that many organizations, most organizations probably now see the folly in that. If we think about the exponential growth and change that we've seen in technology, in the way of work, in the expectations of the people who choose to work in our organizations. 5-year plans are a thing of the are really a thing of the past. You can have a North Star. You can have directionality to what better and better looks like. But again, the days of being able to plan your P&L 5 years out are over, and it's really now about experimenting and adapting, having tighter feedback loops, having tighter iteration loops. Rules and control to freedom and trust. So the idea that people only will you will only be able to extract value from people if you tightly control them and create rules for them to follow, to the idea that most people have good intentions. Most people are able to make and keep their commitments. Most people actually expect and want the best from each other. And moving away from really strict controls and rules to the idea that freedom and trust is going to get better outcomes is another trend that they've noticed. Moving away from centralized authority, where you've got 1 or 2 people making all the decisions, again, to distributed authority, where the people closest to the decision or closest to the customer are able to make the appropriate decisions, very close to the idea of moving from a hierarchy to a network of teams. Secrecy, this is a big one, right? I still find, even in the more progressive orgs that I'm working with, secrecy that's not always intended, right? Secrecy can come from a group of people having an idea, a misguided idea of perfection. Like, you have to have things perfect before you tell people about it. Otherwise, there's going to be too many surprises and people are going to freak out. To the secrecy that still occurs when factions and groups of people think that they know better. And moving to radical transparency. Again, all of these things are interrelated, right? Do we trust the people in our organization enough to be able to, you can't handle the truth. Do we trust people to be able to look at a P&L and understand the responsibility and accountability that comes from actions, right? And they've noticed that organizations that are happier, get better results, more progressive, would err towards radical transparency. And then moving away from strict job descriptions. This one cracks me up. Like, I haven't had a proper corporate job in a while, but I spent 25 years in those types of roles where you get this, when you get your employment contract, you get this job description that probably is recycled from about 4 or 5 years ago. Like, maybe some things changed, probably some typos, and it gets stuck in a drawer along with your employment contract, and you never look at it again, right? So the idea that what is on a job spec is actually what we do, I have found almost without exception that people are normally doing different things, probably doing more than would be articulated in their job description, and there might even be overlaps, and there might even be gaps. So the idea that we are able to, in progressive organizations, really follow these our energy to the work that really brings us joy. But also, I'm not as critical, I think, as Kate is about more progressive organizations not giving people the opportunity for growth and development. I actually think it's the opposite, but it does take a different kind of scaffold and a different kind of self-reflection to actually know what is going to energize you, what is going to stretch you, where your development edges are, and then creating the conditions in the organization to support that. So these are the 8 trends that the corporate rebels have identified. So when Pim comes on the next call, he is, I think, Kate, you said that he's going to take a couple of these, the ones that are most resonating for this group, and really dig into them.
And because not everybody's here today, what I'll do is I'll put something in Slack that just does a bit of a poll, you know, like what are the areas that you'd really like him to focus on, because we don't have him for a long time. But I'll do that in the Slack channel so everybody can get the chance to do a bit of a vote on it.
Great. So before we move on, does anybody have is there anything sticking out as being illogical or dumb or confusing, or is it all pretty obvious? I'm curious. Oh, can you put the slide back up so people can see it, Kate? Oh, welcome back, Nikki.
Hi, I can hear now and I can speak, I think.
Great.
Yes,
Right.
good. I had to turn the computer on and off to make it work. Yes, Susan, I think that all sounds great and makes complete sense to me. It just feels sometimes a little bit, what would the word be, ambitious, and also, and like recently I've been talking to somebody who's quite a senior manager in the organisation, and their roles, they're about to undertake another role, but before they do, they want to see, even though they know the job, for example, they want to see the job description and understand it before they would commit to it, even though they want the role and they really understand the role. And it's kind of like, why do you need a bit of paper telling you what you already know? So it's interesting that as we're trying to work towards something, other people maybe want that security or whatever it is for them. So that's where sometimes the tensions can be lying, can be challenging.
Yeah, that's a really great example. And you know, there's nothing wrong. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, right? It'd be interesting to give that person like a one pager, but then in 2 months or 3 months, say, have you looked at it since? Or maybe can you be really interesting for you to write down what it is actually that you're doing and compare them. Anything else popping out for anybody?
I think the importance of individuals or teams to, for lack of a better word, buy into these trends is quite pivotal, because I can see, and I mean I haven't seen it firsthand, but I could see how some people have this view on if an organisation or if individuals were trying to move from data from PDFs, and job descriptions to talents and mastery, and I guess imposing that on individuals in an organisation, you could then, on the flip side, see that as working towards more rules and controls. So we're trying to bring out freedom and trust, radical transparency. It could, on the flip side, become a bit of a clean-up operation if not done right, and if individuals don't understand the reasons as to why we want to work towards longer term.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? It takes time, right? It takes time to build that trust. Especially in organizations that have been much more on that left-hand quadrant, right? It takes probably a couple years for the organization to actually believe that this is the way that we do things now, because it takes that long for everybody in the organization to have that experience. And it does, it means that it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to do all these things at once. It's probably impossible to do more than one or two of them at once. So that's why our kind of our hypothesis is that each organization will be differently ripe for one of these. And we'd love for you now to spend some time thinking about which of these feels either most exciting or doable.
Susan, can I just interrupt a minute? So I just want to, I just thought this might be helpful before we get into the conversation. We did show this at the beginning of the programme, but it might just give you some kind of practical ideas around what you are looking to explore or experiment. So these were the organisations that were part of this programme last year, and different people in those organisations were drawn to different parts of those or different themes, and had a whole host of different examples. So you can see, I won't read through them all, but you can see that St Jude's, for them, they were particularly drawn to supportive leadership. And we're not going to necessarily change the kind of structure of the organisation, but we're certainly interested in what does it look like if you have the opportunity to evaluate your manager. And there was 2 teams who took part in that. And for the manager, I think that was quite an interesting experience. I think they were definitely on board with it. But I know that they've started to use that approach much broader in the organisation. What are the other ones to just pull out? Because I suppose I just wanted to show you this because it doesn't have to be, I'm going to change the whole organisation. You know, my place had a fantastic experiment around credit cards. They have now taken that on board. So support workers having a credit card, and their expenses process, I think, was kind of admin heavy. You had lots of people touching it, lots of people involved in it, and they basically created, I think it was a couple of rules so that when they gave the support workers credit cards, that you, if it's good for the customer, if it's good for the organisation, then we'll kind of support you. And sure enough, what the 3 teams who piloted that, you know, were really careful about using the credit cards, very responsible around it. And I know that they've started to roll that out across the organisation. But equally, there was an experiment that didn't work, which I'm just looking at them, the Avivo one, which was a group of people in Avivo who wanted to have 10% of their role as purely experiment time, where they got together and worked on something that they were interested in. I think their feedback around that was that it was too difficult, it was too hard, there's so much going on that it was too hard to be able to carve out that time. So I just wanted to show you that, because it doesn't have to all be about, you know, significant, huge changes in an organisation, but much more, what would you like to try out and what's possible in your organisations. Sorry, Susan.
If I can just jump in, you'll see there that Uniting Care West talked about delegating authority. What we discovered in that process is we launched into self-managed teams, or attempted to do that, and then realised that we carried into that space a history, or at least past policies which had specific levels of authority to make certain decisions. So we had to go back, because what we found was people didn't then have the authority to make the changes. So we have made amendments to that, but it is just taking much longer for people to pick up that responsibility. So once again, you can have the best intention in the world, you can make mistakes and so on, but I think just picking up what you said about your experience at Avivo, that when you push it out into the field, you then hit another layer of pushback, if you like, where it's too hard, and what they're referring to is, and I think we experience the same thing as well, which is people are so busy and that they have so much on their plate. And even behind that, what I'm discovering is that people actually don't know how to manage their time particularly well, so that they can't get to the sort of key activities that will help them down the track of getting more or implementing a more self-managed focus. So I don't want to be in any way discouraging. I'm just finding, I report back that we find this much harder once we hit these things. And I think every organisation is going to have its unique challenges.
Yeah.
And can I just say too, we had the corporate rebels come to us. We had a day with them. they were very helpful in terms of giving you very clear concepts. But when it came to the sort of specific issues that we were trying to address, because they didn't know the organisation, that was a bit of an impediment for us. So we found them helpful to a point, but then, as I say, I think we face unique challenges. Each of us will do that, and hence you might find them in some places that they haven't had the experience or whatever. So that would be my only comment. But they're well worthwhile having that conversation to generate good ideas about what this could look like. I'd thoroughly recommend them for that.
I'm really curious about something you said there, Simon. I'm not sure that you meant to say this, but you said when we push it out to the field. That's interesting.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, probably the wrong choice of verbs, but it's we're trying to give them the tools to get on and implement it. So it is a bit of a dance. I think it's probably better that we put it like that, but thanks for picking that up, Susan. Yeah, so it's not a top-down approach. We're trying to work alongside of people. But even there, I still find that there's an interpretation of things that needs time to bed down in the organisation. So that, as I say, with delegations of authority, etc., people are, you can say we're going to change these, financial authorities, for example, but old habits die hard, sort of thing. People still hold on to the past a little bit and don't make the decisions, or you try and encourage them, but and you are limited in terms of, it's only really what they reveal where they're struggling. It's getting that openness in the conversation and then helping them to make the decisions or the shifts in the way they're thinking about things.
Yeah. Sorry, just one more thing on this. Would your guess be that people are reticent to make decisions because they don't feel like they have enough context, or they don't want to make a mistake and be blamed, or that they don't have enough time? Which of those three do you think is most likely?
I've come to the organisation reasonably. I came in December of 2017, and one of the things that I really hear is an embedded narrative that where people have made decisions in the past and they've made a mistake, they've been hammered for that, and so they've just given up, basically. And it's an interesting conversation because, and I think all of the senior management are finding this, when we actually ask the question, well, when did this happen? You'll hear narratives from 2 or 3 years ago, but they still don't hang on to it. And it's and hard to change.
It's normal, right?
Yeah.
No, great example. Kate, I would love to now, let's break up into a couple of groups of 3. I've put the canvas in the Slack channel. And Kate, what would you like the teams to do, the groups to do? You're on mute.
I think we thought it would be easier in smaller groups to just do some kind of reflection. So either you are in the middle, so like Simon's saying, he's in an organisation that is in the process of doing something fairly significant, or you may be in a team that you think actually we could try out X and I'm interested in that. So I think the conversation is focused around what is the theme that you're drawn to? What is the kind of experiment or areas that you are trying something new or trialing something, have been doing it for a while maybe, but so that we get a sense in the room of from each other on where's your focus and what is it that you're working on. And then I think we might be able to see how the broader group can help each other around it if we've got some similarities. So that was kind of what we talked about. There's the chance to connect with each other. What's the theme that you're drawn to? And have you got an experiment underway? Have you got an idea around that?
Great. So I'm going to put you into a couple of rooms now and give you about 15, 20 minutes, and we'll come back at about 5 past the hour. I'll call you back when we're ready. See you soon.
Kate's just joined us, everybody. And we've just figured out that Kate thought we started now. So we were just trying to figure out why Kate hasn't got the times. But I'll sort that out, Kate. Once we finish this call, I'll get in touch with Beth and copy you in.
Okay, sorry.
Welcome back, everybody. I'd just love to hear from everybody what was that like in the small groups, and what have you landed on? If you know, hopefully you've each landed on something that is sparking your energy or attention. Nick.
Yeah, something that was kind of coming up when we were talking about if we were to choose one of these things to focus on, or if we are focusing on one of these things, what does that look like? And just appreciating that it's so hard to do that because of the interrelatedness of all of these different components. And it seems like even if there's one that seems like it's maybe a bit more of a standout, or there's the most energy for that, or it's a bit of a priority, there's almost like another question of what are the other couple of principles that would be very interrelated or interconnected to that we probably have to look at as part of the work that we're doing to progress that. Because without looking at some of those other things, so for example, like I guess I was sharing that, looking at, if we're only looking at like distributed authority, but we're not looking at supportive leadership at the same time. If we're looking at how people are encouraged to make decisions, but we're not really looking at how people are supported, then we end up sort of hanging people out to dry. So how can we appreciate the interrelatedness between some of these factors and put a little bit of energy into a couple of them, maybe just going all in on one? And would that actually end up being a healthier way to move forward?
And so did you land on one or two that you thought, or not really?
It seemed like the supportive leadership and network of teams were sort of stronger themes for us across our three.
Thanks. Renee?
Yeah, it was really beneficial, I think, in the smaller groups, and just being able to get a little bit more detail around everyone's where everyone's at the different places and the different experiences. So enough variance that it was all really interesting, but enough commonalities that we could all identify with, I think, where each other's at. Similar to what Nick said, came up with those key themes, and yeah, I think it was really beneficial.
Great. Wendy?
Yeah, we some of the key themes that came out of us talking about the canvas was really the issue around engagement, and the different ways that we were looking and trying to do that within our organisations. And I gave a quick example. We actually condensed the canvas down into some key areas that we thought were relevant. And then have had have staff then think about, well, what areas are priorities for them. And we've moved on to a little pilot that we're going to try. But I think we also spoke about technology as being a real enabler in some of this process as well. And I think Nikki was really reflecting on the engagement piece is really key.
What's the little pilot you're going to try?
So I'm looking just to engage 2 support workers directly to work with our older people on our home care packages, and really give them permission just to work alongside the people and determine what, in partnership, what are the goals, what are we trying to achieve, and what's the best way then for them to organise themselves to make that happen. So basically they'll determine their own schedule in partnership with the people that they're supporting, to deliver the best service. So that's what we're going to try.
Thanks for.
You're muted, Susan.
Thanks for sharing, Wendy. Nikki?
Yeah, so as Wendy was saying, we did talk about engagement, and we are very much looking at how we can move to a network of local teams in neighbourhoods. However, it does feel like what Nick said was that it's really difficult to move people to there without having that supportive leadership in place. And so it almost feels like probably that supportive leadership needs to be looked at first, or definitely alongside the network of teams. So it'll be those two areas that we'll be concentrating on.
Great. Denver?
Yeah, as Nick said, and Renee, we really found the common thing to be that supported leadership. We're in a similar boat. We're in a similar boat with looking at local teams and self-management. And I guess the areas for myself that keep coming up are that supported leadership, that supported structure still being in place, even though we are working autonomously, where the support is going to come from and how that's going to look and how that's going to be a strength that we can draw upon, rather than looking at it as more of a manager, looking at a hierarchical sort of structure. How can we collaboratively move forward in this area of self-management? But as we said before, the support of leadership is a theme that we keep coming back to.
Cool. Thanks. Simon?
I don't really have much to add. I think Wendy and Nikki have sort of summarised our discussion well. So it's probably supporting leadership to make the change would be where we focused on.
Great. So if Kate gives Pim the heads up to maybe focus around networks of teams and supportive leadership, that feels like that's where most of the energy is. Would that be right?
In this room.
In this room, yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because I'll just share. We had a conversation, and it kind of sparked off something that you said, Denver, about the themes, and it kind of links to engagement, I think, around. So yeah, we're on the journey around self-managed teams. However, I do think it would be very interesting experiment, for want of a better word, to take those themes and to work with support workers around what does this mean for them, and being able to look at other organisations and that may be considered contemporary. Because if I reflect, most of our focus has been on the leadership layers. So kind of getting those people on board, and we haven't done a lot, irrespective of a network of teams, but haven't done a lot around the 8 domains and what that could look like from a support worker perspective, I suppose. So that's definitely going to be my experiment, because I think it kind of links with the engagement stuff around, we don't just want people to be engaged with the particular change piece that we're interested in. I'm curious about where, from their perspective, what would they see when they look at those 8 themes that would be something they'd want to act on. So I just thought I'd throw that in, because that's going to be my experiment. So I'll keep sharing that as we go.
Cool, thanks. Kate, I'll hand it back to you to bring us on home this afternoon.
Okay, so like Susan says, we're going to kind of brief Pim. So I'll put something in Slack to say from the themes, what would we like him to focus more on? But obviously we've heard your themes here. And that's our next session. So we've got Pim for an hour and a half, I think it is. But we wanted to just check in around the book club, or the books that we've been looking at. So I'll just pull up 2 seconds. My slide. So the books that we've been focused on so far are An Everyone Culture, which is the book that Decurian's featured in, which is Brian Ungard, who came on our first session, that looks at deliberately developmental organisations. And then the other book that we pointed out was Carol Sanford's book, The Regenerative Business. And Simon and I were talking about this early on. So just give us a show of hands. Actually, I'll stop sharing so I can see. Has anybody managed to read the books or get close to them? Kate, okay. Susan, okay. And Nikki-ish, okay. So you kind of looked at it.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Kate, I've had a look at the deliberately developmental.
Right, okay, cool. So I suppose it's a chance for us to kind of check in around that really. Is there anything that you liked about it? Anything that you didn't like about it? Anything that you think for the rest of us who haven't got to the books, it's worth having a look at? I know I shared last time that even if you don't read, certainly the regenerative business, if you don't read it all, have a look at the chapter on 30 toxic practices, because that just blows your mind in terms of the way that organisations operate and, yeah, Carol's view on all of that. But so I'll just shut up. So anybody got any thoughts about the books?
As I was saying before, not to sound like a stuck record, but the Carol Sanford book is helpful. I found chapters 3 and 4 very helpful in the sense of giving more structure to what is involved in developing self-management or self-organisation. And I think I had listened carefully to the Corporate Rebels, read Lalo, etc., but Sanford gives more flesh, I think, to what's actually involved in designing the work, and then secondly, the type of person that's going to, I think, flourish in these sorts of settings. And I was saying to Wendy and Nikki that the thing that I found intriguing about Doug Kirkpatrick's presentation was his comment that there were people who came to the organisation wanting to engage with self-organisation or self-organising teams, and after 3 or 4 months didn't enjoy it because they didn't fit the culture. And so I think Sanford's bringing out something about the design of these processes that I think we need to keep in mind, because if you don't have that sort of framework, you're going to have problems, I think. So, yeah, really enjoying it, and thank you, Kate, for bringing that to our attention.
Thanks, Simon. Anybody got any other thoughts? Kate, have you got any thoughts? Have you read them?
I haven't read the regenerative one, and I'm 3/4 of the way through the An Everyone Culture. So I'm in the middle of doing my immunity to change chart. I've done 3/4 of it, and I'm up to my major assumptions. So, and I'm enjoying that process. I think, I don't know, I haven't, books, it's such a dense book. There's so much in it. I haven't kind of come out to kind of pull out what are the main things. I mean, I love the idea of the workplace being a place of being able to do personal development. For me, that's kind of part of the wholeness aspect of work. Some of the reading, some of the ways they went about it, kind of like, it's a bit cultish. And I know they say it sounds a bit cultish, but it did sound a bit cultish. And given that workplaces, power in workplaces is one of the things that self-management is trying to, I suppose, unpack a little bit. To put someone in a workplace and say they have to do this kind of personal development seems counterintuitive, against that idea of, having autonomy, because when we're an employee, we have, we don't want to lose our job. So, yeah, those were ideas that are floating around in my head.
Just wanted to share a little bit in the Everyone Culture book. One of the case studies is Bridgewater, and I don't know if any of you have heard their CEO, a guy called Ray Dalio, wrote a book that was pretty popular last year called Principles or something like that. But Bridgewater is all about absolutely unfiltered radical feedback, like every day on everything, like. And for me, I was always a bit suspicious of it. And one of the companies that I'm working with now, an ex-Bridgewater employee, is working with us. And she's like, absolutely, she said that it changed her life. And now she is really in a position where she's sorely missing the continual feedback and opinion on her work. But what's very interesting is that a little birdie has told me that what they've discovered is that this radical, unfiltered feedback is not actually working for developmental purposes. It's good to diagnose issues, but it's not useful for development. So again, I think it's super interesting that both Reinventing Organizations and In Everyone Culture are curations of works in progress. And I think that maybe I know that I probably fell into the category of thinking, okay, you know, Morningstar has always worked this way and will always work this way. Same with the other organizations in both books. But I have to catch myself and remember the reason that they're so progressive is that they keep on progressing and changing and learning as they're going. And I just find that intriguing, fascinating, and hopeful.
Okay. Just for your information, everybody, Carol Sanford has another book called No More Feedback that's just come out recently. It is incredible. And I was saying to Simon this morning, so I'll post the link to that book, No More Feedback. But I was also saying to Simon that I was talking to Carol Sanford a couple of weeks ago because she is looking to run a program in Australia and New Zealand. So I have nothing to do with the program, so I'm not selling it. I have no kind of personal gain from it, but I'll put the link in because you might be interested in it. Because at this point, I don't think there are enough organisations for it to run. So she was asking about how might that work. So I'll put the link into her. But like I say, I'm not selling it. It's just for your information. Okay, so Susan, do you want to tell us a bit about the next book that you suggested?
Yeah, it's kind of makes me feel a little bit shy because it's a book that I co-wrote a couple of years ago called Reinventing Scale-Ups. So what happened after Reinventing Organizations was published is that it just went absolutely viral in some communities. And about 3.5 years ago, a group kind of...
I think Wendy's not muted.
I just muted her. There was an online group that kind of got together and like congealed into about 500 people in the space of about 3 months. It was called Teal for Startups. And the project there was, how do we take what Frederick says and kind of create a practical, almost step-by-step toolkit, blueprint, guidebook for organizations that want to start experimenting. That was a failed experiment because we never actually produced anything out of that group. But 3 of us characters decided we wanted to persevere. We put together a session, a slot at a conference called South by Southwest, which is in Austin, Texas in America. And it's probably like one of the most progressive neo-thinking conferences out there. And we decided that alongside that, we'd kind of create a little bit of a handbook, which we did, which was the first iteration called Reinventing Startups. But then what we found was that this way of working is not something that organizations think about maybe in their first couple of years, where it's a small team of 2 or 3 or even 5 highly trusted colleagues. But it's when you get to the point where you're deciding for the first time that you might have to put in a layer of middle managers, or like now the growth is starting in a way that your only choice up until now has been to do it the traditional way. So the book's called Reinventing Scale-Ups, but I also think that it's really relevant to any organization that might want some really easy to try tips, tricks, hints of how to do everything from onboarding to performance evaluation to creating roles instead of job titles. We, again, like the other books, that Deliberately Developmental and Reinventing Organizations, practical examples from real companies doing this kind of stuff. So I think it'll be useful, and yeah, it'd be great if this could be our next book group monthly book.
Okay, right. Shall we do a checkout? I hope today's been useful. Like I say, Pim is with us for the next session. I'll put a poll in Slack and see where that takes us. So should we just do a kind of, I don't know, one word where you're at as we check out? Okay. Susan, do you want to start?
Better.
Better. Okay. Nikki?
Tired comes to mind. Sorry, I know you only want one word, but I think that's just because it's this and it's a funny week. Excited.
Thanks, Nikki. Renee?
Eager.
Cool. Denver?
Intrigued.
Nick?
Encouraged.
Simon?
Eager would be me as well.
Kate?
Yep, why not? Eager.
Wendy, you're still there. Okay. I am encouraged. Be my word. Okay, thank you, everybody. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Yep, I'll pop the recording in the next couple hours. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, cheers. Bye.